and welcome to a brand spanking new installment of the SIP series on the Stir. For those of you, the show for those of you who want to make the most out of your at-home entertainment in these very strange times. We want to wish all of you a happy holiday weekend, and of course, I'd like to bring in my Binge bestie, the other half of this show, our special guest host, author, entertainment columnist, sitcom producer, and creator, Debbie Baldwin. Hey, Debbie, good to see you.
Hey, Trish. Thanks for having me back.
So, as some of you know, Debbie released her first ever novel earlier in the spring, in May actually, called False Front. And Debbie, we see some traffic going on Amazon and all these online retailers. Tell us just a little bit about your book.
Well, I would say that it's kind of the ultimate beach read. It's a steamy romantic suspense novel with, you know, a suspense plot involving an arms dealer and an abduction, and then a very heartwarming romance plot about a man and a woman who were separated in their childhood and reunite. And I'm been blown away by the response. It's been great. Amazon, you know, the reviews, it's, 50 plus 5-star reviews on Amazon so far. And
it has been quite impressive.
I've been joining in book clubs, which has been so fun, via Zoom, and sometimes socially distanced book clubs that have met in parks and stuff. So it's really been a fulfilling experience. And I'm diving headfirst into the second book in the series, which will feature 2 of the minor characters from the first novel, and it'll be their love story in the second novel with another suspense plot involving Ponzi schemes and stolen art, and so it's a lot of fun
stuff. And yeah. I am so thrilled that you are hard at work on the sequel, because this book was so hard to put down. I think it took me a couple days at the most to read. Yeah. And you get that kind of, you get disappointed as you're reaching the end because it's such a fun ride. And then you just see there 10 pages left and 5 and 2. But we're all happy to hear that you are indeed working on that sequel. So, Deb, we are looking forward to the second in this series. It's going to be the False Front, or actually everything in the series is going to have false in the title. Is that correct?
Yes. And so the second, the working title right now is False Pretenses, but I'm still kicking around some other options in my head. It's amazing how many phrases involve the word false that never occurred to you. And I'll sometimes just be walking down the street and remember one and be like, oh yeah, I should write that down.
There you go. So for today's show, we are reliving the best and biggest summer blockbusters of the past several decades. Usually this time of the year, we're thinking about summer blockbusters, going to the theaters. This time of year is usually the biggest time of the year for the box office. But, right now in the summer of 2020, we're dealing with a lot of unusual things, including empty movie theaters, Deb. So yeah, we're going to turn to you now and tell us just a little bit more about how you put together this list. Because as we go through this list, a lot of you are going to notice that maybe some of your favorites aren't on this list. And I want Debbie to explain what some of the criteria were for her list, her now signature top 11 list.
Well, it was very hard to narrow it down to our traditional top 11. So when you think about a summer blockbuster, though, there's a few things that, jump into everyone's mind. It's a big budget film. It's a huge, good versus evil story. It's a movie that the audiences, you want to stand up and cheer at the end. I kept off big franchises like the Avengers, X-Men, Harry Potter, because and you know, everyone's got their own opinion on this, but well, there is one exception with the Avengers film, which we'll talk about in a bit, but unless there was one film in the franchise that really stood out as that, you know, seminal movie that qualified as a summer blockbuster and also stood out in the franchise itself, I just kept, you know, Star Wars, all of them off the list because they would take up the whole.
We could do a whole show on that. We could do a whole.
You know, there's movies like, I'm trying to look at what you know, like Die Hard and Speed and even Animal House and Ghostbusters that definitely qualify in some ways as summer blockbusters, but I wanted to keep it to those kind of real stand up and cheer movies that you think of when you think of a summer blockbuster. And not all of them are action films, but that's certainly dominates the list.
Definitely. And I love the way that you describe it. It's like it is a stand up and cheer, because as we were talking about this, I mentioned to you that I do remember watching them in the theater opening weekend. And these are movies that once you are done, once the movie is done, once the credits roll, my first thought was always, I want to see that again. You know, I want to see that again.
Right. You know, I want to go get my friend and make them watch it too. You know,
exactly. Totally. All right. So we're going to go through your top 11 list, but we do have to mention this special movie from 1975 because it really defined for us what a summer blockbuster is.
It really created the notion of a summer blockbuster unwittingly.
Exactly. This is officially not on Debbie's list, but we had to mention it, and that is Jaws. More than 67 million people saw it when the film was first released, and that was when we started mentioning summer blockbuster, that term.
Yeah, it was released in June of 1975. Steven Spielberg directed. Roy Scheider stars as the sheriff in the fictional town, which unexpectedly gets a great white shark in the waters over 4th of July weekend. And it really created the concept of a summer blockbuster. Everybody went to see that movie. Everybody knows that everyone knows the line, we're going to need a bigger boat. Everyone knows the tagline from the film, don't go in the water. I mean, that opening scene of the woman skinny dipping. I mean, it's so, iconic in everyone's mind.
Sure. And, I was unaware, but this movie was the movie that pretty much launched, if that's what you would call it, John Williams's movie scoring career. Just like you said, those two notes that are so ingrained in your memory every time you go to the ocean, that's running in your head as you step into the water.
And it's so funny because as a composer, you think, you've put together so many, especially him, beautiful, moving, incredible pieces, virtual symphonies for film. And the thing that he's going to be known for forever is
two notes. Yes, exactly. See, that's another show we can do. John Williams soundtracks and all those movies. So quality stand-up and cheer kind of movies. A lot of them are. So let's officially delve into this list. And we're going to start in 1986 with a movie that was written and directed by James Cameron, and that is Aliens with Sigourney Weaver, of course.
Aliens, right, was 1986. There's another 1986 film on the list. There were two summer blockbusters that year.
Yes.
And Aliens, which was the follow-up to the original movie Alien, but in my mind, Alien's a great film, but Aliens, plural, is, goes in the record books for just a fantastic movie. Sigourney Weaver is, she defines kind of the female badass heroine in films, along with maybe another woman on this list who we'll talk about in a bit. But she, keep away from her, you bitch, that final scene when she's protecting the little child Newt and fighting off the queen wasp alien. It's just fantastic. It's a great story. There's a great thread of suspense. The acting's unbelievable. It's, you know, James Cameron, this is his wheelhouse, making films like this, and he certainly set the bar high with Aliens for sure.
And speaking of Sigourney Weaver being that badass heroine, she was actually nominated for Best Actress for this movie, the first woman in an action film to be nominated. She did not win, of course, but you know, it just tells you how memorable and how star-making that role was for her.
Fantastic. And if you really want to feel old, the little girl who played Newt is 44.
Oh my goodness, 44? Damn. Okay, so we talked about Sigourney Weaver being acclaimed for her role in this film. Also, really gotten accolades for this film is the special effects, of course, that a lot of us remember. Do you know how they created those sounds for the alien screams?
I do not.
Okay, so I found this really interesting, and who would even think about doing this? But they're actually shrieks from baboons that were altered in post-production, and that is what those alien screams are, because they have to come up with some sound for the aliens. And somebody thought up, okay, baboon shrieking.
You know,
that's what we do.
One thing I've always felt was very interesting about that film and makes it so realistic, you know, as far as alien movies go, is that whole concept of those aliens really seemed to be developed from an insect's, like, you know, phases of life, and that kind of sense of that, you know, wasp-like queen with those pods. Everything about that was so clever and well thought out. I thought it really kind of went outside the box as far as depicting what an alien species would be, and
somebody
did it incredibly well.
Yeah, somebody did their research. So with all that, with Aliens being the film that it was, you know, you kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier. It would, believe it or not, it was only the 7th highest grossing film of that year. The highest grossing film of '86 was Top Gun.
Top Gun. And, you know, the Top Gun beat them to the punch at the box office. Aliens, I think, was released in July or June, and Top Gun was released in May. Top Gun did not have that kind of hype that Aliens had. Aliens was more promoted and was a sequel, technically. So Top Gun was this kind of unsuspecting box office smash. Kelly McGillis, Tom Cruise, obviously, Anthony, and we've talked about Top Gun before on this podcast, and that was the kind of movie, I mean, to quote the line from the song of the film, "You Take My Breath Away," everything about that film was a real stand up and cheer moment. I mean, from the romance to the funny parts of it, to the tragedy, to the action. It was across the board just a great movie.
Definitely had everything. Definitely one of those memorable movies with such a memorable soundtrack. Every time you hear those songs, you think of the movie and you think of the scenes.
I mean, and you know, people to this day, I feel the need for speed. I mean, everybody knows the line.
Right. So from Top Gun, we jump into 1991, and we have Terminator 2, Judgment Day, or T2. Deb, why is this on your list?
Another criterion for making this list should have been the one-liner from the film. We have Top Gun with "I feel the need for speed." We have Terminator 2 with, of course, "I'll be back," and of course, "Hasta la vista, baby." This again was the sequel, and Terminator and Terminator 2 spawned, I mean, I want to say half a dozen sequels.
I lost track, yeah. But this was the sequel to 1984's The Terminator, of course, so it took, what, till 1991 to make Terminator 2.
Yeah, and sci-fi fans will debate this, but in my mind, Terminator 2 is the better film. Linda Hamilton was the second badass female heroine that I was referring to
She
when
was
we were talking about Sigourney Weaver.
impressive in this movie, my goodness.
I think she was James Cameron's wife at the time.
Or soonly became James Cameron's wife.
And this is James Cameron's second film on the list. He, as I said, this is his wheelhouse, making these big, over-the-top, limitless budget, giant films, Avatar, from everything, and he does it well. And Terminator 2, obviously, is a great science fiction movie. Robert Patrick as the Terminator villain, Edward Furlong as the young boy. It's, every minute of that film is entertaining and gripping. It's just a great movie.
So you mentioned that this, in your opinion, is probably the best out of the series, and the Academy actually agreed with you. It is the only Terminator film to be nominated and win Academy Awards, winning 4 out of 6 that year in 1991, mainly technical awards. But, it is a winning film. And you mentioned Edward Furlong, and I do remember that was such a breakout role for him.
Yeah.
This production took so long that he actually aged during filming down. So imagine you have this teenager. Production took such a long time that he aged during the filming, and his voice changed. They had some continuity challenge because he was growing. And so for him to stand next to Linda Hamilton, they had to do some trickery with that to just make sure nothing, is off. So that just gives you a little behind the scenes. And you talked about some of those lines, hasta la vista, baby, I'll be back. All right, so Arnold Schwarzenegger had only 700 words of dialogue in this film. 700 words, it's not a lot. You're a writer, you know what 700 words is, not a lot at all.
I know.
He was paid $15 million for this film. And if you think about, if you break that down into the words, he was paid $21,429 per word. Hasta la vista, baby costs $85,000 and some change.
Well, to be fair, if you want to use Arnold Schwarzenegger to peak capacity, limit his dialogue.
Yes,
and increase his action scenes. And then you've got a great film.
And they did, and they surely did, definitely. So we're going to move from 91 to 93, and we've got a monster of a film, and that is Jurassic Park, made $914 million, highest grossing film of 1993. Steven Spielberg himself made $250 million from the film, the most an individual has ever made from a movie. And what a movie to make it from, my goodness.
Yeah, and Spielberg, it's no secret that he is a genius. And Jaws was his first blockbuster, Jurassic Park, his second. It's the story of, Richard Attenborough plays the man who brings I think it's Michael Crichton, the novel.
It is.
Brings it to life and creates a theme park of real dinosaurs. And I love the line from that movie. I think it's Jeff Goldblum's character, but I can't remember who said it, but it's that humans are always preoccupied with what they could do, not what they should do. And it's this whole concept of, mankind playing God and, things go wrong.
No kidding. So Jurassic Park, with a lot of these summer blockbusters, I remember back in the 90s especially, it just seemed like from one to the next, they really were sound effects, visual effects, masterpieces. You want to watch the next one to see what other things they've done, what other technical marvels they've done. So talking about this, in terms of special effects, a lot of the really memorable parts of the movie were kind of primitive when you think about it. You know, when they're talking about the T-Rex sounds, we were talking about what they did with the alien sounds with the baboons. So the T-Rex sounds were actually a combination of dog, penguin, tiger, alligator, and elephant sounds that they mixed in the studio. Again, you know, who is in charge of combining all these animal names and coming up with these sounds?
Yeah, and that's a job. That's a guy who has that job. I mean, for real, like
exactly.
It matters, you know.
But you know, think about all the special effects from Jurassic Park. But this really fascinated me. One of the most challenging effects that they had to create for this movie was the vibrating rings of water. Remember that?
Uh-huh.
So apparently Spielberg, what he wanted to do was he wanted the T-Rex to announce its presence before being seen. And he thought of the vibrating rings of water, and they couldn't get it right. And when they finally did, it actually involved a glass of water atop a guitar that was being plucked. So imagine with all the technology at their disposal,
right.
This is, you know,
sometimes there's a simple solution.
Exactly. Most iconic scenes of the film, and it's a glass of water and the guitar. So we were talking about box office records. Jurassic Park, 914 million. It held the box office record up until 1997 when another James Cameron film, Titanic, came along. But that goes to show.
Yeah, and you know, everybody knew that this film was going to be huge. Michael Crichton there was a bidding war for the movie rights for this film before the novel was published. Wow. That's how, you know, hot everybody was, you know, wanted to make this movie. And, you know, Spielberg and his team did it right. It's fantastic.
Wow, no kidding. So speaking of 1997, the next film on your list is from 1997, and it was Men in Black, which I really enjoyed. It was such a fun film. Just a combination of Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones was like the best part of the movie for me.
Yeah, it's, you know, Smith and Jones. It's, you know, a fun. This one is a comedy, you know, unlike Will Smith's other film on the list. And, you know, they're fighting aliens, and Will Smith is a New York City police officer who is chasing down a very fast-running perpetrator at the beginning of the film, and, you know, quickly discovers that there's more going on. And, you know, it's the last suit you'll ever wear. It's Tommy Lee Jones as K and Will Smith as J. Is that right? I think so.
Yeah.
And, or maybe it's the other way around.
No. Tommy Lee Jones was K. Yeah.
K. And yeah, so it's, you know, just there. And I have to say the villain, if you could call it that, the alien in the film, who's wearing a human suit, portrayed by Vincent D'Onofrio of Law and Order fame, is you know, another little cool just factoid about this film. He did
an outstanding job as villain, my God.
Playing a cockroach.
Yeah. Speaking of cockroaches, again, you know, when we're talking about special effects, the American Humane Society was involved in this filming, and they were looking after the cockroaches and had to count all the cockroaches at the end of the day, make sure they were all accounted for, to give it their seal that none of the animals or creatures were abused during filming. If you're interested in knowing this at all, Will Smith stepping on those cockroaches, those were actually mustard packets. He was stepping on.
You know, I don't claim to be an expert in any of this, in any of that area, but I will say I think someone needs to tell the Humane Society that the cockroaches have been doing just fine on their own for a very long time. Like, I don't think they need a group of humans looking out for them, but I understand what they're doing.
Well, these are special cockroaches apparently, yeah. and they were well taken care of. Yes. So Barry Sonnenfeld directed the film, and actually was inspired by Will Smith's performance in 6 Degrees of Separation. Another movie we'll come back to later because it played another role in another Will Smith film that we're going to talk about. But also, Sonnenfeld's wife was a fan of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and that is what led them to Will Smith for this role, and it was the perfect role for him.
Yeah.
All right, so we are going to, actually, this is a 1995 film. This had made an appearance in another one of our lists prior to this, but this was a summer blockbuster, and talk about, standing up and cheering, and that is
Just
Apollo
say that.
13. Yes,
Yeah.
and it was nominated for 9 Academy Awards that year, including Best Picture, but it won for Best Film Editing and Best Sound.
And I tell you, I honestly think I did stand up and cheer. I think there were people in the movie theater, the audience did stand up and cheer when when they splashed down. When the Mission Control, that scene when Ed Harris is in Mission Control, it's just, boy, talk about an uplifting film. And when you really look at obviously this is the story of the ill-fated Apollo 13 mission, which has a glitch with an oxygen tank on the ship, and they have to return to Earth before going to the moon. Jim Lovell, played by Tom Hanks, and it's his memoir that the film's based on. When you just read even the most basic description of the situation, you cannot imagine that was survivable. You think, how on earth could anybody, any scientist, any NASA administrator get these guys back safely to Earth with what they had to work with everything malfunctioning, with the abandoning the ship. I mean, it's just I'm standing up and cheering right now. It was fantastic. And the acting, Bill Pullman, Tom Hanks, Kevin Bacon, Gary Sinise, and there's conflict on the ship. It's not this whole we've got to work together to figure it out. Tom Hanks is playing the referee for a lot of it, trying to make the obviously the situation is getting to these men. Ed Harris is on the ground trying to get them home. It's just a great film, true story, great movie.
Definitely, and the screenplay too, kudos to that, because it could have really been bogged down by a lot of technical stuff, because you are dealing with a spaceship and what could go wrong. But as the normal theater goer, you were really clinging to every single word and every single scene, and just really hoping for the best. We all know how it turns out, of course, before the movie, but at the same time, it's they were terrifying moments as you are watching them unfold. Yeah,
and we shouldn't neglect mentioning Ron Howard as the director, who has proven time and time again as his career has gone on what a directorial genius he has. Thank God he moved from acting to directing, and think of the films that he has given us as a director. It's just amazing.
All right, so we mentioned this film earlier, and that film is 1996's Independence Day, which grossed 817 and some change million worldwide when it was released. And again, Will Smith as the lead role. Director, writer Roland Emmerich and his co-writer Dean Devlin knew they wanted Smith for the role after once again seeing him in 6 Degrees of Separation. So that movie, 6 Degrees of Separation, didn't really, it was a whisper, barely a whisper at the box office, but really put Will Smith and his acting chops front and center, and to launch him into these big, huge blockbusters.
Yeah, and it's interesting because a lot of times these big action films will skimp on the cast to allocate the budget to the special effects. But Roland Emmerich and the studio did a great service to this film, casting Will Smith, Harry Connick Jr., Bill Pullman, Randy Quaid. I mean, that cast made that movie. Jeff Goldblum. I mean, who is, again, his second appearance on the list after Jurassic Park. He's
yes.
surprisingly been in a lot of big blockbuster films because he doesn't really look the part. But yeah, so that's, you know, that was another real stand-up and cheer movie, and it's a, you know, 4th of July movie. It takes place on 4th of July. They planned it as a summer blockbuster, and they succeeded.
Oh boy, did they succeed! Yeah, definitely.
And I mean, honestly, the whole cast is incredible. But the moment when Randy Quaid and you know, it makes me laugh because it's not a bittersweet moment. It's like a comic sweet moment when, you know, he's sacrificing himself to save the world, and, you know, says goodbye to his kids, and then, you know, tells the aliens that abducted him so many years ago, I'm back.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it makes me want to see that movie again. I really had fun seeing that movie the first time and the second time. I think I've seen it at least 2 times now, but I would love to see it again, especially for the 4th of July weekend. It really puts you in the mood.
Definitely.
Yeah. So our next film on the list is also from 1996, and that is Mission Impossible with Tom Cruise.
And, you know, we were saying that, like, these movies all have kind of an iconic, like, catchphrase, and obviously, you know, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is the big one for Mission Impossible. I think Mission Impossible also has an iconic scene, because when anybody thinks of the original Mission Impossible movie, they think of Tom Cruise suspended by those wires breaking into that room. And, you know, it's the mark of a, you know, great, memorable action film that the scene, like, just immediately pops into your head like that.
My goodness. And, you know, you and I have talked about this before, but Tom Cruise does all of his own stunts, or almost all of his own stunts, and definitely that scene. And apparently when they were doing that, he kept hitting his head on the floor. So again, you know, we're talking about just really primitive special effects and trying to perfect that scene. He figured out himself that the way to balance himself, so that beautiful face of his that kept hitting the floor, was to balance.
That's the moneymaker. You can't hit the floor.
The coins, put coins in his shoes to balance himself.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, go figure. But you're right about that scene, that, you know, out of everything from that movie, so that just visual eye candy, it's that scene that you remember.
And I think, you know, moviegoers, certainly this is true of me, moviegoers in general, the CGI, you know, can really take a viewer out of a moment when you're noticing the CGI instead of what's actually happening on screen. So the fact that Tom Cruise is actually doing that, being lowered by wires, being in a room, you know, it lets the viewer get lost in the action and not in the tech, which is
no kidding
for a movie.
Yeah. So Dab, you know, Tom Cruise, that's really one of his most iconic roles. But did you know that Mr. Clooney was first offered the role of Ethan Hunt? And think about how that would change that film just visually, and the idea of Ethan Hunt had it been Mr. Clooney, but he was busy filming One Fine Day, if you can remember that little movie with
Michelle Pfeiffer.
Yeah, so that was the reason.
Ever imagine George Clooney in that role. I can barely imagine George Clooney running.
Yeah.
You know, like exerting himself in any way.
Right.
I mean, he's fantastic, but I wouldn't.
Stunts. Yeah. Oh, I'm with you. So that really took me by surprise. So he was actually offered the role. And give you a few other men who were considered for the role: Bruce Willis, John Travolta.
I can see it.
John Travolta?
No, I can see Bruce Willis, but not John Travolta.
Yeah. Nicolas Cage, Ray Fiennes, Mel Gibson, also considered for the role, and we're just so happy.
Yeah, they chose correctly. They have chosen well. Yeah, but I mean, this Brian De Palma directed film is not perfect plot-wise. It's a very muddled plot at points, but if you just kind of sit back and enjoy the action and, know it launches, I think now 7 sequels, with the consistent sidekick, wingman in the film is part of the Mission Impossible team is Ving Rhames, who is incredible playing Luther.
Yeah.
And, really almost as much of a box office draw as Cruise himself. So,
Sure.
yeah.
Sure. Okay, so we're moving on, talking about iconic roles that you identify with one particular actor. He will always be Jason Bourne for me, and that is Matt Damon, 2002's Bourne Identity.
Yes, that was Doug Liman directed that film after being a largely independent film director. He directed movies like Getting In and Swingers before this. This really kind of launched him into a much different, stratosphere. He directed Mr. and Mrs. Smith after this, so he really changed his, paradigm for directing. But this one is based on the classic Robert Ludlum spy novels, The Bourne Identity, The Bourne Supremacy, and The Bourne Ultimatum. Matt Damon is, the iconic Jason Bourne character. They've spawned a bunch of other, like, sort of next gen. There's, I think, a TV series too, with all different Jason Bournes, which is, I haven't seen it. It might be fantastic, but when I think of the Bourne franchise, you absolutely think of Matt Damon.
Sure.
I think of that magazine fight in the apartment. He fights the guy with the rolled up magazine. But yeah, this was the first film. I think it was the best. It didn't, I don't know if it really like knocked the box office out of, I'm mixing metaphors, I apologize. If it really killed it at the box office. But, my gosh, it was an entertaining movie.
Oh, it definitely was. So, again, talking about Matt Damon, this was offered first to Brad Pitt, believe it or not. I like Brad Pitt. I don't see it. And he turned it.
I see it. I see it. Yeah.
I see him as Rusty from the Ocean's 11 series, always eating constantly, not action hero, Jason Bourne type.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Matt Damon was, I can't imagine anyone doing it better than Matt Damon.
Right.
But I could see Brad Pitt pulling it off.
You know what? He turned it down because he was making Spy Game with Robert Redford. And based on what he did with Spy Game, yeah, maybe, I guess I can see that a little bit. He would have given it his own Brad Pitt spin with Bourne. But yeah, that was very, very fascinating to me that they thought of Brad Pitt for that role. So let's jump on up to 2008. And we were talking about how you really stayed away from a lot of the superhero series unless there was something that was exceptional, a standing film exceptional out of that series. And one of them was Iron Man from 2008.
I mean, Iron Man is in a league of its own with those Marvel movies. That being said, the Avengers movie was great. They're all great. They're entertaining. They're big box office, shock factor films. But for me, Iron Man was just that much better. Robert Downey Jr. is the best actor in the bunch. There's a lot of good actors, a lot of really good actors in the Avengers film, but Robert Downey Jr. is in a league of his own, in my opinion. That whole cast, Terrence Howard, Gwyneth Paltrow, Jeff Bridges as the villain was fantastic. When, you think of these big summer blockbusters, I know we talked about the Jaws music, those 2 notes. We skipped over the Mission Impossible music, which is
that's true. Yes.
And of course, the Iron Man music is immediately recognizable. And I think of Iron Man as one of those films that if you're searching cable late at night or, just looking for some engaging, entertaining, but also intelligent film, that's the movie you would stop on and watch. it's certainly where I would stop.
Yeah, true. And so with all of that, it wasn't actually the highest grossing film of 2008. In fact, it was the 8th highest grossing film, even with the $585 million revenue that it took in. So ahead of Iron Man for the box office receipts in 2008, we have Indiana Jones, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, Kung Fu Panda, Hancock, another Will Smith movie, and Mamma Mia was ahead in terms of, money making. And the number one film of 2008 is officially the last film on your list, and it was a big one, and it was The Dark Knight, starring Christian Bale.
Yes, and
Heath Ledger.
It was, this is the DC Comics contribution to the list since we had a Marvel Comics one.
We don't want to create any, yeah.
I want to be fair. Christian Bale is the definitive Batman in my mind. You can debate it all you want. You pick someone. It's fine, but he's my favorite. I think he's the best. Dark Knight did $1 billion worldwide at the box office. Heath Ledger, in the iconic role of the Joker, had died from an accidental drug overdose that January of 2008 before the release of the film, which again kind of propelled, and it's ghoulish to say that, but it was his last. I mean, he was making another film, which the name's escaping me. It was a Dustin Hoffman film. But anyway, so, obviously fans rushed to see The Dark Knight to catch, his farewell performance. Christopher Nolan, the genius director behind so many great films, Memento, Inception. I mean,
yes,
just a incredibly gifted writer and director.
And this was the second installment in his Dark Knight trilogy, The Dark Knight. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it absolutely is deserved every dollar it made at the box office. The acting is unbelievable. Heath Ledger won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for his role as the Joker, and the first of two to win an Academy Award for portraying that role. Joaquin Phoenix just won this year.
That's right.
But you can't really lump those two performances together because the Joker film, it's in a different category really than these sort of comic book villain roles. So, but anyway, The Dark Knight's a great movie, great hero, great villain. It has it all.
Definitely had it all. I remember seeing that in the theater, and it had everything going for it, much definitely. So that ends our official top 11 list. And, as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, we also kept those franchises in mind, but kept them off the list just because there's so much of them. We're talking Harry Potter, the X-Men, the Avengers, the Marvels, Star Wars, of course. But you also had a little mini list for me, your honorable mentions. What made them honorable mentions, and why did they make this list but not the official list, Deb? I'm seeing Speed, Die Hard, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Animal House, The Lion King, Ghostbusters, Risky Business, The Fugitive, which I love. I mean, Tommy Lee Jones in the 90s was, my gosh. And Saving Private Ryan.
I honestly think, we were joking when we were doing comedies that, why all these incredible comedies were in the 80s and why, what happened in the 90s.
Yeah.
This happened in the 90s. A lot of these like incredible action films are from, the 90s and the early 2000s.
That's true.
But I think for me it was more just falling into that definition of a summer blockbuster, that almost like patriotic, like a bigger issue in the film than just a bomb on a bus or Nakatomi Plaza, but these real, like the true definition of a summer blockbuster is this kind of save the world. And so I tried to include almost, most films that had a very kind of patriotic 4th of July, good versus evil vibe that was bigger than just, one bad guy and one good guy. But I mean, honestly, you take those movies like Speed and Die Hard, Animal House, I mean, any day of the week I would watch those movies. I would stop what I was doing and complete. I mean, someone just sent me the little video clip of John Belushi motivating the fraternity house to get revenge when he gives his big speech about the Germans bombing Pearl Harbor. And I mean, it's just, I would drop everything to watch that movie almost any time.
You're right about that. The good news is a lot of these films that we've mentioned are now streaming on Netflix, Disney Plus, all those other streaming services. So they are accessible to you at home. And but for the films that we're supposed to drop this summer, we have to wait just a little bit longer for them. And, we've got the Top Gun sequel, which is Top Gun Maverick. It's been delayed, of course, due to the pandemic. Wonder Woman 1984, was supposed to drop this summer as well. A Quiet Place 2, the sequel to the John Krasinski, Emily Blunt horror flick. Ghostbusters Afterlife was also supposed to drop this summer. So, of course, all
James
of those...
Bond.
Say that again?
The James Bond film was
yes,
supposed
that's right. Yeah.
And Black Widow, the Scarlett Johansson Avengers vehicle, too. And it's a crime. I mean, it's a shame because the other thing about these blockbusters is as entertaining as they are to watch in your living room, it's not the same.
It's not the same.
I mean, you watch some of these movies and the guy next to you is smacking you on the back like, yeah, and you're like, you're like, yeah, you're high-fiving the guy next to you, you don't know him. I mean, that collective feeling of like unity of cheering for the good guy in those films is priceless. And it's too bad we can't go to the theater to watch them right now.
I know. And of course, when it becomes okay to start slowly going back to the theaters, it's going to look a little different. So, Deb, no, you can't high five your neighbor next to you. You can't share your popcorn with a stranger, but, hopefully we start getting a little bit back to normal and we can start enjoy some of these films.
Yeah, you've got you're going to have like the plexiglass sides on your seat.
Curtains, yeah.
You can have through the plexiglass, but yeah. So it's a different world now, and some things are not going to go back to the way they were. But hopefully, getting an audience motivated in the theater will return at some point.
Yes, definitely. But until then, you've got us, and so we're going to end with our signature sweet treat, Deb. We are featuring a summer favorite, and I'm talking about fresh blueberries. They are plentiful at the U-Pick farms around town and out in the country, and also at your grocery store. But I am making for you, Deb, blueberry coffee cake, and the recipe that I have is actually called AKA Boy Baked, because the creator of the recipe, apparently her little boys are so addicted to this particular blueberry coffee cake that she named it Boy Baked. But it is so easy to make, and again, we're using pantry-friendly ingredients, and who doesn't love a good coffee cake in the morning? Or anytime, actually, really.
And I really want to hear this recipe because I've tried for probably a year to duplicate the blueberry muffins they make at City Coffee in Clayton, the creperie. Are the best blueberry muffins in town, and I probably am going to regret saying that because they sell out every day, but and I can't get my muffin. But so maybe I need to move on to coffee cake because I cannot duplicate their muffin.
I really think the key is in the crumb topping, and some people freak out when you think about crumb topping and you think that it has to involve all these fancy ingredients, but really The best crumb topping is the simplest one from the simple ingredients like flour, butter, sugar, and that's pretty much it. You just have to know how to put it all together and to sprinkle it.
That's the key.
Yeah, that's the key, definitely. So we will have that recipe for you on GazelleMagazine.com. And Debbie, happy that you're able to join us for another fun episode.
Thanks, Trish. I'm going to make that coffee cake.
Yeah, definitely. And so everyone tune in next time when Debbie and I once again get together and bring you the Sip series on the Stir. See you then.